There is no one-size-fits-all or a simple fix when it comes to your well-being. Hi, my name is Josephine, founder of Positivity Center and Wellbeing Consultant, and a person figuring out how to be my best. So join me in conversation with friends, sharing what works for them, and then listen to what works for others. Well, hello and welcome to the show today. Wellbeing That Works is on its way, and I'm pleased and excited to introduce you to my guest today, Brandon Tumblin. Welcome.
Hi, Josephine. Thank you so much for having me. Good to see you again.
I know, it's so good to see you. So we are having a bit of a role reversal today because I know the first time we met was I was on your show, and we've been in connection and had some good chats since then, and very helpful chats for me too in my well-being. So thank you for being part of my network of social companions in this world, this big world. I'm in Alberta and you're all the way in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. Now I can't remember. Where did I?
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
East Coast. It's good enough.
Yes, but yeah, far apart, really. It's almost like oceans when you think about how wide Canada is.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, how would you love to introduce yourself to the guests? Like you get to pick which part of you want to introduce and about you. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. I mean, I say I'm like most people. I have several parts of myself, but overall, I'd say I'm an engineer by profession, but I have a side project, which is the Strong Stoic podcast. So I suppose I'm a philosopher on the side of sorts. So on the Strong Stoic, I delve into a lot of different things, but it's all centered around philosophy as a way of life. You know, how do you achieve a state of flourishing, a state of real deep meaning and happiness in life? And so I talk to a lot of people as well. I mean, brought you on the podcast as well, where we spoke quite a bit about dying and the death process, which is a huge thing in philosophy as well. So I would say engineer by day, philosopher by night, gym rat, strength coach. That pretty much sums me up, I suppose.
That's so cool. So I'm just dying to ask you then, how does your philosophy of living life flourishing influence, like you said, by night? So how does it influence you by day?
Yeah, well, I think it all kind of ties in together, right? We segregate this stuff, but I think it's all connected. What the Stoics believed was that happiness or well-being is sort of achieved through virtue, which is being a good person. But fundamentally, what it means is you have a duty to the world, right? So what you do during the day, what your 40-hour work week for most people is it is your duty to the world. It's like, what are you trying to do to give back to your society, the community you live in, and everything else? And so what I would say is that there's a really integral component in Stoicism to be involved in your community and to give back to the world. And it shouldn't be seen as something that, I have to go to work and it's oppressive that I have to go to work. It should be seen as something that it's a duty. So you do it out of a sense of duty to the world to make the world a better place. And it's all kind of tied in together. I mean, I would say that I put a lot of philosophy into my work, and probably a bit of engineering into my philosophy. So
right.
Cross-pollination.
I love it. Yeah. Maybe share a little bit about that cross-pollination process for you too.
Yeah, sure. So, well, let me do maybe the simpler way first. So philosophy into the workplace.
Yeah.
So I work I'm a project manager for boat operations. So one of the key understandings in philosophy is that, particularly in Stoicism, is that, it's pointed towards virtue, being a good person, but you have to accept that there's things that are just not within your control. And part of that is weather, right? And we all get upset about the weather when it rains or snows or pours. What happens in my industry pretty frequently is that you actually lose money sometimes, or you certainly lose progress because of weather, because there's some weather you can't sail in. And so that's a really key idea. Now you can get upset about that. You can get all crabby and cranky that you're losing money, the job's losing money, but if it's out of your control, period. So you need to learn to just let that go and accept everything as it is. And so philosophy sort of, it gives me direction in how I do the job specifically. And then the other way, so just a quick way on the other way from engineering into philosophy, I actually find that my engineering background allows me to break down a lot of the philosophical topics into tiny pieces. So one of the things you do in engineering is you take a very complicated system, such as an engine, and you break it down into parts so that you can understand each part. And then if you understand each part, you can understand the whole. And that's how I break down topics and make it hopefully easier for myself and other people to understand. So, but yeah, it's cross-pollination. You can't get away from it, right?
Yeah. And so do you find, like, in your life, are you doing it leading by example, would you say, or are you actually also able to help others do that too? Because that cross-pollination idea is, I don't know if it's necessarily something that people are embracing it, but it hasn't been fully embraced yet. There's still this distinction of, this is your personal life, that's your professional life, and they should be distinct from one another. And my feeling is they need to be blended because they come from who you are as a person. So how can the parts of you not show up in both, and all more than just those two areas of life? But yeah, so how do you do that? Is it, just by setting an example yourself, or have you found yourself also enabling other people to find that philosophy in, being purposeful, having that responsibility in their work? Finding meaningful work is basically what you're talking about.
Correct.
Finding meaning in your work. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I would say that there certainly are boundaries in between the worlds, but they tend to be limited by practicality. And it really, in a sense, it is actually, the Stoics, one of the 4 virtues in Stoicism is wisdom. And so here's a great example. If someone from work comes to me and they're upset about something, I can delve deep into the philosophical ideas, and I can talk about Marcus Aurelius and what he would have done in this situation. But for most people, if they're not into philosophy, that's going to kind of set them back. And in other words, it's not the wise thing to do, because they're going to be sort of maybe intimidated, or maybe they're probably going to think I'm really weird, which is fine. But it's not doing what I wanted to do, which is help this person have perspective and become okay with the situation. So you need to be wise about it, and you need to maybe put it in a way that's easily digestible, and while also, accepting that their view is valid. And so I would say that there are boundaries, but it tends to be limited, I think, by practicality. What am I trying to achieve here, and how can the other sides of me help me in achieving that?
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your perspective on the boundaries there too. Like, what do you see as boundaries and the benefits of boundaries?
Well, I mean, I would say that I tend to be a private person in my personal life. And I think, the problem with no boundaries is that it's very difficult to, there's this old saying that you shouldn't work with family or something like that. You shouldn't start a company with family.
Yeah.
And there's something to that. And it's because there's a certain level of expectation that's required, and families work together all the time. It can definitely be done, but you need to be careful who you share your personal life with, and vice versa, who you work with. And a lot of times you don't get a choice on who you work with if you're in a company. But yeah, I guess the problem with boundaries, with no boundaries, is that is removing this boundary going to negatively affect what we're trying to achieve? And sometimes it could be the case that this boundary is negatively affecting what we want to achieve. So like if you're out to dinner with a client and they start talking about how they like to go bicycling, and you like to go bicycling, now you could say, well, I don't want people to know about my personal life, so I'm going to put a boundary up here, but that's actually not going to benefit the work. So you let them in, you let them know about your cycling. Now, maybe you don't tell them about your trauma when you were 5 years old and you fell off your bike, maybe you leave that out, but it really gets down to, what am I trying to achieve, and what boundaries are helpful and what boundaries are useful. And that's something that you just need to figure out in the process of it, right? It's very, very complicated, but that's what wisdom is, right?
Right. So I actually love that, because you're more thinking about what's the goal here, what's the outcome we're after. So then who or which parts of me need to show up to this conversation, to this relationship, to this circumstance, to this trauma, to this event, whatever it is, whether it's at home or at work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
totally.
I can get my head around that. Yeah.
Totally.
Totally. That's awesome. That's so helpful, because, I tend to say, like, who you are needs to show up in all areas of your life because it's who you are. And then that's why I was kind of digging in deeper to what you were saying, because I'm like, okay, I want to explore, well, what do you mean by that? And like, what does that look like? Because there's always more than one perspective, right? And I think it's so important for people. If somebody was over boundaried and they heard me say, you need to bring more of who you are into your, all areas of your life. Okay, that's a good message for them, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's always, which is so the point of this show. I always wanted it to be just, this is what works for people. And it works for some people some of the time. What's going to work for you based on who you are, where you are in life? What's the context around your life and living right now? So yeah, this is a beautiful little conversation to be having, to share with people, to say, what do you need? Do you need more boundaries? Do you need less boundaries? What's going to help you? What's the objective you're after right now?
Right.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering if, and you can say no, but like, I know you said you didn't really want to talk about your personal life, talk about blurring the boundaries right now, but have you been through an experience where you've had to either tighten up the boundaries or loosen them up that you can think of that you can share?
That's a great question. I would say probably I tend to struggle more with, I need to loosen up a little bit more. I would say so. That tends to be my weakness. But at the same time, it really depends what it is. I mean, people are so complicated. And if you really look at it, because one of the things I do that probably oversteps a little bit of boundaries is, as you know, I'm very philosophical, and I like to think really deeply about things. And I can go right into a deep conversation with someone. And doing the podcast has made that problem worse because, you open Zoom and then you just get right into the dirty details. So yeah, sometimes I would say that I'll find myself doing the very thing that I said you shouldn't do, which is start talking about Marcus Aurelius to someone that has no idea. So yeah, and that's a situation where I have to remind myself, oh wait, like this isn't philosopher Brandon, this is engineer Brandon. Let me tone that down a little bit and be a bit more wise about it. But I mean, it's the same, like that balance that you're trying to maintain between what boundaries should be up and what boundaries should be down. I mean, it's a living thing. Yeah. It's a living thing, right? You have to be constantly present.
That's beautifully said. I think that is my takeaway, is because I'm hearing almost like you needed to hear from me. I needed to hear from you, like in this present moment, because it's a living, breathing conversation. We didn't plan this, like it's just happening. And I'm resonating with you and laughing because there have been times where I'm just like, okay, like I just want to talk about well-being, I want to use positive psychology words and get in there and talk about theory and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, but there's a listener who's going to listen to this after.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I'm trying to keep in the back of my mind is, what is it like for a listener, right? Yeah. And how do we bring these conversations to meet them in their worlds? Yeah. So it is a living thing, and boundaries are meant to be built up or broken down. And it really just depends, what you need them to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just like a plant. I mean, sometimes you got to prune it back. Sometimes you got to let it grow.
Yeah. It's great. Right? Great analogy. I was thinking it's also like your physiology, your biology, the cells in your body, they're constantly being broken down and coming and rebuilding. And I mean, that's life inherently. It's this process of breaking things down and building them back up. And where that balance is, again, it's a living thing. It has to take into account the context of the environment that you're in. And that environment is constantly changing. And it also has to take into account who you are, and you are also constantly changing. And so that's what makes things hard, but also very beautiful, because it means you always got to stay on your toes. You're never going to come to a situation where I know exactly what boundaries need to be up. I know exactly. It's like, no, you're never going to know that. Just be present, do the best you can, and live your life. And that's all you can really do.
Yeah. And like in sort of the area that I like to spend a lot of time in, which is the world of caring. There's some research that actually talks about caregiver well-being in the context of them having blurred boundaries or clear boundaries in their care. And I get it. I get what the research is saying. And, it's also contextual because it's only talking about those people's lives. And I think that's the key when I read research papers. It's like, okay, those 223 people or those 1,025 people, like that's who this study was on. And so then I also think about in care situations, when you're providing care of some kind with somebody, if you have too tight of a boundary, then okay, where's the connection? So are our boundaries serving what we need in life? And for me, there are times when I need connection, and then for other people, there's going to be times where they need to like have a boundary go up and they actually need to break connection. Maybe it's an unhealthy relationship, or maybe it's like I'm more of an introvert, let's say, and I just need some like refresh time, solo time. But recognizing, I think it's such a good, like, it's a switch, more of like, dimmer switch for light. Like, what does it need to be up? Needs to be downward. What does it need to be? And to be all or nothing is really hard. I imagine, sometimes I think about people, often when you're having a conversation with someone who's really down, or like, in an anxiety space or a depressive state, and you just go flip on a light, like imagine them being in a dark room and you just flip on a light. It's like, whoa, like if someone ever done that to you, your eyes just like turn the light off. Right?
Yeah.
So how do we meet people where they are too, right? So there's like our own boundaries, and then there's the people's boundaries, like whoever is in our life or in our work or wherever the situation we are in. And then how to get those even two boundaries to like integrate and interlock.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of layers.
There's so many layers. And I had this epiphany probably a year or two ago, where I was thinking about this very thing. How do you maintain these boundaries? How do you maintain like a relationship, for example, with someone, which is really what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And I had this realization that, so I've been playing guitar since I was 9. And so I have, in a sense, a relationship to this instrument that I've been playing forever. And that relationship is, it's a spiritual one for sure. And it's an enjoyment. And, but there's times in my life where I've stepped away from the guitar and I haven't touched it for a couple months. A couple months might be a stretch, but I haven't touched it for a while. And when I go back to the guitar and I fall in love with it again, it's there waiting for me. But then I thought about, well, what if that guitar is another person? And what if they have their own boundaries? And what if they have their own need for space? Now you can't just leave them for 3 months and expect them to be there when you show up. So like relationships are so complicated, and you talk about, okay, well, where are my boundaries, and then where are someone else's boundaries, and how do we come together so that we both get what we need at each time? And there's no simple answer to that. We haven't really figured out relationships yet. There's a reason why so many people still struggle with them, but I think it tends to be facilitated through constant communication and just an unwavering forgiveness for when whoever is in the relationship with you, they do something that you don't like, or you do something they don't like. It's this constant unwavering forgiveness and also communication.
Yeah. Like I've been through some personal situations where boundaries were clearly communicated. And in one of my tools for caring, I actually share about that story with my godmother, because I was, part of her care team for quite some time. And she originally didn't like that, and that is when you get into a place where you have to accept care because you actually physically or cognitively need it. It's very difficult, very, very difficult. And you don't want to ask. That's what I find in my experiences. Many people just don't want to ask. They feel like they're being a burden, is usually the word that I hear described. And so she didn't want to be a burden to my life. And I also had to express to her that it gave me joy in my life to be able to just have that relationship with her. And so we came to this firm understanding that if there was, for some reason or another, I couldn't do what it was that I had signed up to do with her, that it'd be communicated. And that like my family, like my kids and my husband would always come first. That was important to her. And so we did communicate that. And there were 2 instances where I just had to hard stop. I'm like, I can't do what I said I was going to do. And we had to figure out a way around it and bring somebody else in and, find help or bring in a meal or whatever it was. But then she began to trust that I was actually going to implement the boundaries that we discussed, because that's another thing that we tend, especially in care, we tend to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it because I said I was going to do it. And, my husband will forgive me, or my kids will be okay, or whatever. And so it was really important for me to hold up my end of the bargain with her, because we had clearly communicated what those boundaries should well, not should, but needed to be for the two of us, because that was who she was and it was who I was. And I constantly remember reminding her too, like, I really like get so much joy being here with you. Or like, I remember the first time we made like French onion soup, and she loves French onion soup and she hadn't had it in so long. And just the, like, when she took the first bite and she went, oh, you know, like when your eyes roll from the back of your head. And I would, instead of just like living in that moment with her, I'm like, but remember that. And like, it's a thing we go back to time and time and time again. Because it creates a laugh or a memory or a joyful moment, or, you know, a moment of connection. Yeah. And so it was important that she knew how it filled me too. And so like, that's to me, that's communication. And I don't know, like the guitar couldn't talk back to you.
Right.
You know, I mean, and people, you know, it's complicated with people.
Well,
like,
yeah. So I was just going to say that, you know, because really what you're doing when you have a relationship and you're doing things like you're talking about, you're not really doing things for your individual flourishing. You are, in a sense, and hopefully they're aligned, but between two people, there's a union between two people when you have a relationship. And so if you have a romantic relationship, for example, you're both acting in ways that flourish that relationship. And in a perfect world where your actions are aligned with your values and you both are communicating properly and everything is working perfectly, your individual flourishing will be aligned with the flourishing of the relationship. But again, this is a constant balancing act. And so sometimes there's going to be places where one partner is contributing more to the union of the relationship. And there's going to be times where the other person is contributing more than you. And it's a living, breathing thing. But at the end of the day, I think what it gets back to is it's not about me per se. It's about this union. And I need to flourish in that union. It's not like my personal flourishing doesn't matter. It all needs to be aligned. Sometimes the best thing for in your example, the best thing for that relationship to flourish was for you to remind yourself of the boundaries and take some time and whatever you had to do to sort your individual flourishing out. But I think it all supersedes to this union of the relationship.
Yeah. Actually, I remember saying, what matters to her matters to me, and what matters to me matters to her. Yeah. So then there's a shared mattering.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're kind of getting at is, you know, there's even exercises I guide caregivers through where they think about what they value and get to know what the person they're caring for values, to look for which values overlap one another, because that creates a connection, like a shared mattering, if you will. So then it's like what their two parties are doing, what you're saying, connect to the flourishing of the thing that connects. It's almost like there's a third person in that relationship.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also not always the case, again, to get back to the other side of the situation where you know, there's no boundaries, because I learned something really fascinating to me. I learned that relationships that last a really long time, romantic relationships, decades and decades, they have phases where they actually like unlearn each other. So they set boundaries. So they might not even touch or barely even talk to each other for 2 weeks, but then that allows them to come together again and I like to say fall in love with it again. And, you know, and it sort of goes against what a lot of us think. You know, we think we're going to get into this perfect relationship and then we're going to have this shared union for the rest of our lives and it's going to be beautiful. But I think the reality is that, I mean, sometimes you just need to get away from things so that you can really appreciate it. So you can still value the relationship, but you can change the boundaries in order to keep things alive and living. And that supports your individual flourishing over time. Absolutely. and the union of the relationship over time.
And so this constant denominator seems to be the idea that life is living. And so the context around it changes, whether it needs to be built up or pruned, you know, taken back, if you will. Like it's all going to just depend on what's happening. There's no constant where it like never changes, right?
Yeah. That's helpful to know, though, because if you're in a situation where you can't wait for things to be perfect in the future, can't wait to get that job, can't wait to graduate school, you just, there's a point where you start to realize that no, like life happens right here, right now, and it's flawed, inherently flawed, it's imperfect, but there's value here. There's something good here.
Yeah, I just love that. So aside from philosophy, going with that and thinking like life is right here, right now, and it's living and breathing, what does your life require of you right now in terms of, your own flourishing? Are there practices you'd say, or like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would say, I think, to your, in a sense, to your point, I think I need to stop being so philosophical in some ways. I think maybe I've pushed the boundaries a little bit too far.
Mm.
What I've found is that I need to learn how to separate the philosopher from the brother, from the son,
Mm.
from the friend, because philosophy is important, but sometimes it's just important to just be there and not think.
Mm.
And I really, really do struggle with this. And sometimes I'll be out with a friend and I find it difficult to actually just enjoy it, just sit back and just enjoy it, because I'm so focused on what I think is my duty, on work, on deep thinking, epiphanies, deep reflection, revelations. But that side is vital, but I think I need a little bit more of the just being a person, just being a
Mm.
person that can like sit there and listen and not overthink. And yeah, so that's where I say I am at the moment. I've pushed the boundary a bit too far over the past couple of years, which is, I think you need to do that. I think you need to push the boundary sometimes, but eventually you need to come back the other way and find your balance, right?
Well, and I guess, it's never just that you reach that either. You're not going to reach
Yeah,
balance. Then you're going to want to go the other direction again, right? So,
right, exactly.
yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that too, because I find myself when I want to have conversations with people, like it's very hard for me to just like have a barbecue and like just have like, I don't know, call it superficial conversation. It's actually
Yeah,
very difficult for me. It's a struggle. I'd rather have a soul, kind of connection driven conversation with somebody where we do talk philosophy or like,
right.
and I love, but it fills me so much. And so like for me, like, and I can hear what you're saying in your life too. And I think I'm exploring the opposite end, where I'm exploring having more deep philosophical, connections with people, where it's like, wow, it's so cool how like this rabbit hole we create, and how time flies. That is the one thing,
Yeah.
like it is a flow experience for me when I'm having in-depth conversations, philosophical conversations, spiritual conversations with people in my life. I just walk away going like, how did 3 hours just pass? Because it felt like 30 minutes.
Well, that's the crazy thing, is that's how you know that you have meaning in your life. It's when the suffering that life is ceases to be relevant, right? And we all know what this feels like in some ways. Like if you're ever sick and you listen to some really great music and all the pain just stops. The pain's still there. The pain's still there. It's just that your mode of being at that point in time is so meaningful that the suffering ceases to be relevant. It's
Mm.
there. If you think about it, it's there, but it's not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can make your day as over time to be in that state of meaning more and more and more, that is the road to flourishing. That is the road to well-being, I think.
And so I'm hearing both of us kind of have aha moments as we're having this conversation. What would you recommend to somebody to get to that place where they're able to observe, access, to make some deciphering decisions about what their plant of life needs right now?
Yeah. I think it gets down to the age old, this is nothing new, but know thyself.
Mm.
I think one of the things I've come to realize is that know thyself, it's the same thing as love thyself. So it's not, sometimes we try and segregate things. Like first you have to know yourself and then you love yourself. But I think they're two sides of the same coin. That's kind of how I'm starting to think about it. So yeah, I think you need to really find out who you are as an individual. And it's easy to say that. And I would say that I'm still in the process of figuring myself out. And I would say that you're never going to 100% know, but there's certain things that you can do that's going to help facilitate that. One of the best things you can do is write about, like, journaling, write about your past, write about what you would like your future to look like. And also having good relationships. You know, we get to share our lives with people, and they offer us a mirror of ourselves. You know, Carl Jung said that if you don't like something in someone, it's probably because you have it too. So this really gets down to know thyself and love thyself. Well, if there's something you don't like about someone else, you probably don't like it about yourself, and maybe it's not conscious. But yeah, that's what I would say is you need to go on a journey of figuring out who you are, and who you are is changing. So you're never going to know completely, but you can know enough to flourish, I think.
Yeah. And then what you need to do to flourish will shift depending on who you are at that time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good. Yeah. Well, such a great conversation. Thank you so much. I really just hope people can take away that there is this for me, if I would summarize our conversation, it would just be all about finding the consistent work that needs to go into that self-discovery, the who you are, and just be ever present, because the who you are is always shifting.
Right. You're never going to know who you are.
Right. No, it's really, yeah, that's true. It almost like in the quest of it is like the question remains, like, I don't know.
You need to get closer to it over time.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to get a little bit further away from it at times, but it's about the process of figuring out who you are.
Yeah.
That's what's important.
And so it's almost, I feel like we need to like do a little bit of that'd be a good show. The process of discovering who you are. What does that look like?
For sure.
But we'll start with boundaries for now.
Sounds great.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Wellbeing That Works. Before you go, take 1 minute to write down your takeaway from today's guest. And be sure to download our Wellbeing Evaluation Sheet to help you along your wellbeing journey. And if you've got something to share to inspire others, be sure to be a guest on our show. Until next time, with love and kindness.